I always feel very welcome here.
Good morning, everyone. I think we're going to get started. So welcome to the first program of the week. I'm Ronna Brown. You are at Philanthropy, New York, and we are glad to have you guys here. I think everyone knows, and I'm just on a different subject, everyone knows we're moving this year, right? So please come often the next few months and enjoy this space in this neighborhood, because come this summer, it will be Times Square. And we look forward to welcoming you there in due course. As to this program, we've been incredibly excited about having this program. We've been talking about it for several months now, and I am not going to belabor the point, but get us started and turn it over to Susan Olivo, who is both a board member and one of the co-chairs of the IDP committee. So thank you, Susan.
Thank you, Ronna, and welcome everybody. I'm so happy to see such a great turnout. I think that this is the type of event that you sign up for if you're really interested in the topic. It's always good to come to Philanthropy New York for networking opportunities, but I think in particular something like this is really interesting to people, and you're here because you want to be and are interested in the topic, so we'll have a lot of chance for audience participation. We have some great panelists with us today. I would really encourage you to read their bios because they're very, very impressive. I'll just pull out a few highlights of them. Both of these women, Tanya Odom and Giraldo-Kerr, master's degrees in education from Harvard University, written books, written papers. Tanya has lived in more countries, I think, than I've ever visited. She speaks widely on these topics. She speaks on them internationally, nationally. Anna has just written a book on them.
I'm in the process.
Recent? Yep, in the process of it. They both are available. We will list resources so that when you leave today, you can take these resources with you. I think you're going to find these ladies terrific, and you will want to use them as resources in your own companies as you move forward with this topic. So I want a couple of housekeeping items. The clock behind me is 5 minutes fast. Just wanted to let you know. Also, I believe that these microphones are predominantly for our friends who are live streaming. So if I'm talking into a microphone and you don't hear that, it's just be aware of that. And so when you guys all participate and have a question to ask, you'll be handed a microphone. Please identify yourself, your name, and the organization that you're with. Okay, because I have attended some conferences live streaming, and it is difficult to hear if you don't use the microphone, so thank you for that. So, microaggression, right? Do you remember back in the day, really bad award shows, or when you were a kid in school and you had to give an oral report, and you stood up there and you said, Webster's Dictionary defines heroism as whatever. So I went to Webster's Dictionary online, and I couldn't find microaggression on there. But it is on, of course, Wikipedia, right? So microaggression, little things that make a big impact, right? Impact on the people who are the recipients of the microaggression, and very often they're unintentional from the person who is the, I don't want to frame this the wrong way, perpetrator, but I don't mean perpetrator, you know what I mean? So we are going to learn a lot about this topic today, and even more importantly, we'll learn about microaffirmations. What do we do about this? How can we take what we learned today and then take it back to our own lives and the workforce? So the structure of today's event will be that we'll give the ladies a few moments to talk, and then we're so pleased to get some questions ahead of time from the group. So I'll pose some of those questions. We'll let them answer, Anna and Tanya answer the questions, and then I'll open it up to the group for your thoughts and further questions. Then we'll move to the next question, kind of, like that sort of give and take. We will also then Anna will sort of wrap up that part of the discussion with the topic of microaffirmation, all right? And then we will open it up to Q&A from the audience, because those of you who didn't have a chance to send us a question ahead of time, I am sure that today's discussion is going to generate a lot of questions, so we'll open it up to that. We'll break up into small groups for a few minutes, come back and share that, and then we'll have a wrap up. Okay? Any questions before we start? Awesome. Then I'm just going to turn it over to these supremely qualified women.
Go.
I just want to know what they do in their spare time. That's how I'm looking at this.
So good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm going to try really hard not to stand up, which those of you who see me work know it might not work. But for right now, I'm going to try, just for live streaming purposes, to sort of sit so I'm in the line of sight. So without even before, I'm going to do literally a couple of slides just to get us on the same page about the definition. But without me even showing you a slide, how many of you think you may have experienced, just by the language, a microaggression? May have. What's an example of it that you think? And if you're not right, I'm not going to say, so just share, right? So what do you think? Give an example. Yes?
I love it. I asked her what she thought of. Thank you. I asked her what she thought of the writings, the piece of writing that I did for her. That whatever, and it was a casual Friday on a summer. I was wearing very fancy pants, like whatever on a casual Friday. They're tropical type pants. She said she gave a stank eye at my pants and said, "I thought your writing was a little flamboyant."
That general noise in the room, right? Yeah. So come back to that. So one of the comments that was made is that seems pretty macro, and I think that's a really good thing for us to talk about at some point in terms of what is micro or what is macro, right? And I think Anna could help us to think about that. What I think you'll hear from us a little bit is the impact might be the same sometimes. And that's the hard thing sometimes for people to think about. One other before I show you sort of a definition we'll be using, one or a couple maybe. Anybody else want to share one? Yes. Oh, the wait for the mic.
One of the things a few of us were talking about right before the program is what feels very classic is you're having a conversation with someone, you're looking at them, and they go, and start reading their phone as opposed to actually paying attention to you.
Big example. That people understand and get. So a couple of definitions, and we'll be using the names of a couple of people who you may know, and Anna might want to talk a little bit about this because she's working with Mary Rowe. We're also tweeting, so in order to get the message out, the hashtag is down the bottom, right? So I want to just acknowledge that. We're the facilitators. I want to also just say that Susan, as our moderator, has been really involved in this and so helpful in terms of thinking about how to move the process along. And Aditi, who's now walking out, but she has to be thanked, has been working on this for eons and eons and eons. And I just want to say every detail, every I dotted, she deserves a lot of thanks. But that in terms of the tweeting conversation, those are the handles, that is the hashtag, okay? So a couple of examples and definitions, sort of the paper cut analogy is one that people give often. So you see that picture of a paper cut. And by the way, you will be thankful that I didn't include some of those other very graphic pictures on Google Images. This was one that was a little less severe. So I love this language, and I'm biased in terms of supporting Mary Rowe. A little bit of history. Chester Pierce, actually in 1970, uses the language of microaggressions in some of his research, talking about virulent racism in particular. You also have sort of connections to that. And what happens in the 1970s is Mary Rowe, an economist at MIT, started to do research and look at why some people were leaving organizations, particularly what she was referring to at that point, women and minorities, okay, women and people of color. And when you look at her original research and look at what came back, it wasn't sort of these big things, right? It was, Michael's language is really helpful here. It was that look, that tone, that snub, and sometimes hard to define. So this language of fiendishly efficient in perpetuating unequal opportunity. They're in the air we breathe, and the books we read, and the television we all watch. And because we cannot change the personal characteristic, what leads to the inequity. Isn't that interesting? So it's there, right? So a microinequity for me is when I was trying to find a picture of a brown finger with a paper cut, it's not on Google Images. So the next time one of you with brown skin gets a paper cut, please upload a photo. Because,
I'll make a note of
right,
that.
exactly. Because, no, but I mean, seriously, like, what does it mean when you're,
Totally
when you're looking at it? These are little things that we don't think about. So, you know, some of us do a lot of work trying to get images out there. Some of us are invited to conferences, and I have chosen in my career in the last 2 years not to go to conferences where I don't see women or people of color represented. That is my personal choice. Could be my personal professional liability. but I have a problem with talking about topics. That's a big aggression, right? That might be macro. It's sometimes just in the images of the conference and what we put on our websites, what we put on our brochures. So this last piece, it's woven into all aspects of our work, life, and this says U.S. education. I would probably expand that. This comes from some of her earlier work. Again, you'll see. Here's again a little bit more in terms of Mary Rowe, and then I'll show you Daryl Sue's definition. So again, small events, hard to prove events, right? They're covert. So one of the things we want to talk about is sometimes you sort of, Michael's example of that look at my pants, hard to prove or hard to go to HR about, right? Hard to say this is really impacting my ability to want to perform, connect, do my work, and yet we've all been on that side. So the interesting connection is, as Mary Rose started to do her research, she started to include race and gender in her language in terms of the impact, right? So we're going to connect it to diversity a little bit. And then Daryl Wing Su, who's actually a professor at Columbia, this is his book I bought for some of you, brought with me, if some of you want to see it. It's called Microaggressions in Everyday Life. And he actually says race, gender, and he adds sexual orientation. So when you start to see sort of the iteration of this language and the research, and now there was a BuzzFeed blog that went viral, 19 microaggressions that LGBT people experience on an everyday basis, that went absolutely viral, right? So you're starting to see this, people with disabilities also, again. But a lot of, in the beginning, I think it's interesting to look at how this topic started to be used. Now, I have to tell you, I've gotten into some disagreements with some clients around this because I believe, and actually if you look at Mary Rowe's original research, and I think it's a micro inequity and aggression that she's often not included in the pioneers around this data and research. If you look it up online, you have to dig more for her name. Now you have two people who respect her, one person is working with her, so it's a little different, but who's mentioned more is Dr. Sue right now. Right?
I can respond to that later
if
you want.
But I think it's interesting, and a couple of us in the university world have been talking about how do we pull research, even that, who we chose to share or not share, right, in there. So one of the things that's interesting in the Daryl Sue's work, he's done some very interesting, I don't want to say pop blogs, but he did 2 blogs on Psychology Today that really introduced many, many more people to microaggressions. And you'll start to hear people talking about it. Here are some examples. This came from a post that was looking in 2013, that was looking 40 years later, 40 years after some of the seminal initial research, what were some of the micro inequities that were there that we sometimes see. I would add global ones here. So to finish the point from earlier, one of the things that I appreciate in the earlier research, it includes white men as being on the receiving end of micro inequities, right? She gives an example, she meaning Mary Rowe, about a white male in an Asian company, right? If that person is other, right? That person can be treated as other. So, and my experience, particularly in the UK, is that I do a lot of work there, and this concept, there are a lot of white men who can say to you, let me show you the ways that I've experienced micro inequities. So
my husband wanted me to ask you about short white men.
Exactly. No, exactly. Sure. Absolutely. Right. And what that looks like. And I think so that's there. But the rolling of the eyes we see, I think the pecking away at the phone, interrupting a person, etc. So this is pretty graphic, but those of you who know Frida Kahlo might not be surprised, right? So this is an example, in addition to the paper cut, of what's sometimes used to describe micro inequities. Cuantos Piquetitos is a painting when there was a murder of a woman, and when the man was asked what happened, his response was, it was just a couple of nicks. Cuantos Piquetitos, like, you know, this is what his response was to the police in the paper. And Frida Kahlo depicted this, but some people say those little nicks add up. In this case, she was killed, right, and murdered. So cuantos piquetitos, those little nicks that add up to be these big things, like the paper cuts, right? But, and again, Frida Kahlo, you have to appreciate her to appreciate this painting, clearly, right? This is hard to see. I'm going to stand up because I need to leave here just to go see them, even with my reading glasses on. I want to end with this before I come back.
Can you take a break?
Yeah. Okay, thanks. So I want to end with this because if you haven't seen these, this is important and we may want to talk about this. So what happened actually in March of 2014 is college students grabbed onto this concept of microaggressions and were able to give meaning and wording to their life experience. And what's interesting is it started at Fordham, which I think is often lost. Fordham it starts with, right? So I too am Fordham, I too am Oxford, I too am NYU, I too am Harvard, obviously making the connection to the Langston Hughes poem, I too am America. And so are you a man or a woman? I don't see color. When I give a speech about racism, basically when I give a speech about racism and people are sort of asking, is this his issue? English is my first language. There's an Asian student. And then when you speak your mind at a conference, when you speak your mind, it's confidence. When I do it, it's sassy. Do not change your vocabulary because of skin color. But if you want to see amazing just examples, these visuals of just I too am all of these schools, they gave these examples of what microaggressions are. And the reason I brought this up is because I know many of you do work with young people, and I too am Harvard has become a play that they actually take around the US. I too am Oxford went viral, and then I told you there are many others as well. So I just wanted to show you that. And then this piece about the connection, and I think we'll come back to this because I think Anna's point connects it, the microaffirmations piece connects to this. So Dr. Su's research suggests that sometimes, and I would say not all of the time, that underlying micro inequities, sort of behind it, or these microaggressions are unconscious biases, which is a whole different topic in itself. But why might I cut someone off? Women get interrupted. We've heard this research, yeah? Women get interrupted more than men in meetings when they're speaking, yes? So if we know that, what's behind that? So the question for many people is the why. And the thought is, perhaps one of the connection pieces is unconscious bias. Yeah?
I think there's a big one missing, which is class.
Absolutely. Great one. The comment was that class is probably missing, particularly for our work, right? Absolutely. So that's the diversity part. You know, I was asked to connect since the majority of work I do is diversity. Notice I put the word inclusion there. When people are looking for behaviors that include people and exclude people, you can't just look at who's around the table. This looks like a pretty diverse room. Doesn't mean all of you feel included. And if I only spoke to the people who I decided I wanted to talk to, right, not everyone would feel included. So that inclusion part is where we sometimes connect the two. These are going to be small group discussions that we're going to talk about in your group, but I'm going to just stop there, okay, and then go on to some of the questions in general about the topic.
Okay, so thank you again to those of you who did respond with some questions ahead of time. So I thought kind of a general question that we get going with, and I'll turn it over to Anna first and then Tanya. How to be attentive to microaggressions without erroneously attributing negative intent?
How do you repeat that question?
Okay, how to be attentive to microaggressions without erroneously attributing negative intent. So I think it's kind of like, very often it's subconscious on the part of the person, the perpetrator, and again, I use that word, but
I use sender, right? Usually. Yeah. I like to keep it at basic communication theory, sender, receiver,
okay,
witness.
So on the sender's part, right, yep, it's unintentional, but the receiver receives it as a microaggression, right? So how do we pay attention to those things? But the sender didn't really mean it negatively.
Okay, yeah, that's the question that comes up in many different forms. So, and that actually shows how much of a perception issue it could be. So, for example, there is no, and this is going to be interesting because I know Tanya's work, but we might not agree on everything. So this is going to be for your benefit. So one comment that is sent, that is received as a microaggression, in my perspective, might not be perceived as a microaggression for another person. So somebody might hear it yes, and somebody else might not. So from the center side, if you're thinking from a center's perspective, how I advise you right now not to become paranoid. That is the wrong way to start this discussion. Okay, from the sender's perspective. From the receiver's side, I also stay away from paranoia. In general, it's not healthy, right? in all contexts. So, and that is the issue with these microaggressions, and that's why actually Tanya and I were just having a discussion. I thought, we need to get affirmations in there. When Aditi and I were talking, we need to get affirmations in there. Because I love the fact that people are paying attention to the topic, but we will be doing a disservice to your work, to us as the self-growth, if we want to be better individuals, if we only stop at the aggressions. We need to figure out there is something that's happening that is relevant, that is going to not eliminate them, but is going to help you manage them. So, go back to the question. Just, as a sender, do the best you can. Become more aware, and actually I'm getting ahead of my slides, but become more aware of how you interact with people. What reactions do you as a sender get from people? The feedback, nonverbal, verbal. Are there certain people that you feel uncomfortable around, that you're like, okay, maybe this is when I am doing this. So that is how I was started. I don't know if Tanya has.
No, it's great. I definitely agree. And I admit I'm paranoid.
You could become, with the type of work, you could become paranoid.
Sure. No, it's a good.
Anybody have some thoughts on that from the audience? Something you've maybe experienced personally, or maybe you've been the sender and someone called you on it and you really didn't mean it like that. What's your reaction then? Yes.
Yeah.
Action can be a micro. I'm just wondering if inaction can be a microaggression.
Yes,
We're
absolutely.
in the foundation world. We get emails, tons of emails. If we don't respond, can that be? That might be interpreted as a microaggression.
That's a really good question.
Sort of right. Interesting.
Not to get to the heart of that.
So, it's interesting. I would say cumulative impact, too, right, is also sometimes the language we sometimes leave out. So I thought you were saying in an organization or on a team not responding, but it's interesting because I can imagine you all getting inundated with emails. I wonder from a cumulative impact standpoint, right? If it was once, I think Anna's language is so helpful for me, well, in terms of the way I think about this, in terms of how I receive it. May not be your intent, the diversity world, intent, impact, right? I would say, so email to me is going to be depending on the situation. I would still say the inaction part, one of the things that I think why diversity people have embraced Sue's work, there's something in here that I've not seen, and he says, the language that we sometimes use in organizations, like we don't need to focus on diversity, he talks about as a microaggression. And I can say as a person, I feel that, but has never heard somebody else articulate. You all know this, right? We don't need to work on a diversity. I do a lot of work in major cities around the world. When we're in London, this really isn't an issue. Or, we're in Toronto. Do you know this is the most diverse city in the world? Or in San Francisco, do you not see the rainbow flags outside? Right, so as if that means that we sort of have it. He gives language for me. So in that way, it would be inaction, right? Inaction. I like that language. Yeah.
One more, just wanted to, on the sender side, we've discussed, the paranoia. I wanted to add a little bit more about the paranoia on the receiver side. I've been, throughout my life as an immigrant woman. I was born in Peru, lived in New York for many years, but now in the U.S. for about 30 plus years. I've been on the receiving end of micro inequities, which is Dr. Rowe's preferred term, and aggressions. Now it's aggressions. That's the term that is more popular. So I can attest of the paranoia. Okay, so on the receiver, the paranoia maybe is more prevalent among us who might be more prone to receiving, right? So how do we handle the paranoia as a receiver? Okay, and I have to say, what I've seen around with people that I talk to, that the work that I do is mostly for professionals of color who are on the receiving end, is you have to learn about yourself. You have to also learn that you are also biased. It's not only the ones who send it to you. You are yourself biased as well. You're human. You have thoughts. Now, that's the first step. The second step, and I'm getting way ahead of my slides, but that's okay, is that trust is a word that has to be part of that language. And finding allies that help you support that trust and build that trust. So if you're always receiving and you feel that everybody's a racist or a sexist or any ist that is in your life, then how to ask for help. And not help to complain and whine about. Ask help to help you grow. And we'll get a bit more into that. But I just wanted to address that as well, so just to present both sides. And there's also the witness side, but, again, I'll keep you in suspense.
Why do you think this has become such a hot topic now? I mean, clearly it's been on people's radar screens for a while, but it seems that I'm reading more about it, I'm hearing more about it. Why is that?
It's interesting. We talked about this question, and I just wrote a piece for CNN, and this is now being recorded, so now I'm going to get in trouble. But when I put the language of microaggression in the piece, they kicked it back to me and said it was jargon. And if you read the piece online, it's in. And this was Christmas Eve. We're getting ready to go to church, and my mom's yelling at me because I'm on a device. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. Like literally pulling down the driveway, headed to Mass, family in the minivan. And I'm like, no, literally giving like links to Mary Rowe, links to Sue, to be like, not jargon. So I have this double thought about this, right? And Anna we were talking about this before, who's doing it and what they're doing. I think it's used more. I'm not sure it's always understood. So for someone to say to me it's jargon, and for me to sort of have to push back and say, actually, there's research behind this. Jargon means, right, there's not real stuff. And then I sent them the links, and they said, okay, as long as we have links and some data behind it, and they kept it in. But I do think a couple of things. One is, I think we're looking at lower levels of engagement globally in organizations for people, right? Why aren't people engaged? Why aren't they satisfied in their job? I mean, all this data that comes out all the time that we see, that's hit some real high points from a numbers standpoint. The other thing is, I think diversity. I think the diversity of the workplace and the cities and the places where we live and we work, they're more diverse. So we're going to have those interactions with people who may be different than we are. I did a program recently in the second least diverse place in the United States. And I didn't make that up. There's a diversity index, right? The likelihood that you will meet someone more or less like you. And I was there, and what was so interesting is my facilitator and I were saying, we were wondering about what we would encounter there as two New Yorkers. What would we feel? Would we feel safe? Would we feel comfortable? And what's interesting is we realized that in some of our own bias, there's a potential for us to go there and think that the people around us there in this particular town at university would behave, act, think, or say things in a certain way. And they experience microaggressions from people from the outside who come in thinking, oh, we need to teach you how to be better. And that wasn't our goal, but it's interesting to Anna's point. How do we do some self-reflection for ourselves? So I think the engagement piece, but for me, why I see it more is the increase in diversity. The other thing I wonder, not jargon, but I do think about how many of us, you look at Chester Pierce, who is in psychology, you look at Sue, who's in psychology. I wonder also about the need to give meaning and data behind what many of us experience, right? I don't know how many of you saw Selma, but how do we put language on some of those experiences now that we didn't put on then? But we now have more data, so we give more validity to some of these things which many of us have been experiencing. That's my thought. I don't know if you have a different thing about why now.
Yeah, mine is more, it's definitely in alignment with yours. But for me, if you were asking me for a quick answer, is two things. The microaggressions.com, there's a website. Now, if you want to really feel miserable, go there. And I love it because they've documented a lot of experiences, which offers validation. But it's sad. From my standpoint, it's sad. That's why I'm like, affirmations. We need to get, what is the solution? How can we turn this around? To me, that's where I want to take most of you, hopefully all of you. So, but it's a start. So that viral, the whole videos, the I Am Forum started the whole movement. So that whole push in social media about aggressions, that was huge, because finally I've been doing this for about 10 years. I've spent most of my workshops, just to give you an idea, explaining the concept, because people say, what about this? Now you say microaggressions, people get it. See? So now we can move past. So that has helped. And the other reason, and this is up for debate, but at least it's in my opinion, is that recent events on blatant racism, all the issues, Ferguson, I mean, we can go back, Trayvon Martin, even way before that. People are upset. And those are not microaggressions, you know, at all. But they bring to light all the issues about race, because that's been the whole context. It's about race and how badly we interact with each other because of that. And so people are angry. So that whole pent-up anger, frustration is getting, yes, people don't treat each other well, and we have to do something about it. So it's kind of filtering down to all the little things, the little nicks that you were talking in the picture, in Carlos' picture. You see? Because there are different experiences, for sure. But at the end of the day, they symbolize that we are not good at getting along, that we see people different and we freaked out and we act violently, or we just look the other way. See, so those two circumstances, for me, has brought this topic to the forefront.
What about all of you in the audience, in your organizations or even in your personal lives? Has it become a hotter topic in where you work? And anyone want to give a few examples? Anybody? I see some heads nodding.
Hey, so I'm Erin Ericson. I work for the Mac AIDS Fund, which is owned by Estee Lauder. So it was actually part of our HR rollout was a workshop that people attended on inclusion and diversity, and microinequities was one of the key topics. And when it was rolled out, it was actually rolled out to sort of the higher level supervisors and cascaded down, hoping that, you know, people who are the senders, you know, would be more cognizant of that, and also, you know, have some behavior change and awareness around that. Interestingly, though, I mean, the ironic piece of that is that, you know, if you're at sort of the lower level and you are one of the people who received the training later, you sort of missed out on that information. So when it became a topic of conversation on the teams, you know, they felt left out of the conversation because they didn't know what the term meant. So, you know, interestingly, I think that it was done with like the best of intentions, but some of the unintended consequences of that are, you know, interesting.
Was the genesis of the conference, was it from the HR department? Like, were they the ones that, is that the case in most organizations? Is it the HR departments that are realizing that this is the topic to be addressed, or do we have some very forward-thinking CEOs up there? I don't know. Anybody?
Maybe forward-thinking people at this table.
That's right.
That's why that's right.
No, they may have any of you pushing it. I mean, that would be a question. Because we had heard about MAC, and you all did it internally, and you had quite a large reach, right? What was the numbers? Because I think it's helpful for people to hear. You don't have to have it exact, but you had a lot of people go through the session from what? Yeah.
And it was cascaded down.
Yeah, so that's an interesting one.
Any other examples of how it's being addressed in your organizations, or are you mostly here because you're interested in the topic and you sort of want to pull it into your organization? Would that be a fair statement? Yeah. Okay. I see more heads nodding. Okay. How about some conversation strategies to address microaggression early on before it gets to be problematic within the workplace? Who does that responsibility belong to, and what can we all do in that regard?
Yeah, I was reading those questions, and to me, it goes back to my paranoia example. It's hard to be proactive about, you know, I think of, you know, how we always talk about, okay, let's prevent cancer, let's prevent diabetes, let's try to. So we're always focused, how do you do that on a daily basis? I mean, hopefully we are all trying to be healthy, right? So we don't live our lives thinking, oh, I don't want to get this illness, I don't want to get that illness. Do we? I don't know if anybody, but I don't. And so I see this preventive approach to the micros, the way I dearly call them, is hard to do unless you start with yourself. First is going back to self-reflection and to digging into yourself. And then there is no way to get it right every time. That is for sure. We all do it. I do it, and then so it's one of those. It's the building the muscle kind of analogy here. You just need to keep at it, and I'll share with you a few more things more in detail. But that's how I would address it, and unless you see something more formal. There are several people in your organization like something's going on. You need to. Then it's like, okay, what's going on? And then you will be more, I would encourage you to collect some information. Because again, to your point earlier about how do you describe that look, how do you go about telling people, about what is happening? Mary Rowe usually uses an example back when she started doing her research about a secretary that came to her office. At the time, Dr. Rowe was the ombudsperson for MIT. And she said, well, there's something about my work that I don't know what, it's just people don't like me. I don't know. There's something weird about, where I work. She was the only woman, the only person of color in a lab. There were about 10 scientists, just back in the 70s. So Dr. Rowe said, okay, let me give you a copybook. Come back in 3 months, document what you're experiencing. Woman came back in 3 months with an empty notebook. Says nobody talks to me. You see, so it's it's hard to prevent. I would say again that will lead a bit to a paranoia. In my perspective, is more to observe and start assessing. Be more aware. From this point on, be more aware.
I mean, I think for me, the first thing that came to mind is, I guess, as the receiver, would be acknowledging that it's not just you, right? That's the thing. I'm an executive coach, and I work with people, and one of the things people say, because I've done diversity for so long before I became a coach, was, that comment about the flamboyant comment, perhaps, or a comment about my accent, or a comment about my hair, or a comment about something else. That's something that potentially is other people experience as well. And there's something there's a bit of a freedom for people when they hear that they're not alone in that. So I think that's another reason the concept is helpful to understand. So why I think the MAC example is a good one is because I do think having language shared in an organization is helpful. Having language shared where someone can point it out, because like we've both been saying, they're little things that could potentially be undetected. So for me to say to someone, you rolled your eyes in a meeting or you kept sighing. I was at a meeting recently and there was a very senior woman, and every time this one particular other woman spoke, her body tensed up and she looked at her iPhone. So 2-hour meeting, 2.5-hour meeting, like the first couple of times I was like, Tanya, it's a coincidence. Then you say, I don't know about that. So then you keep looking and you notice that it's not a coincidence. And so it's interesting to talk about that language and to point it out. And I can just say, as someone who experiences this, who is the person who sends the message, because we're all human, is acknowledging that. And I think for me, it's an interesting question, Susan. I'm still thinking about why now. I also think that there are many toxic organizations out there and toxic teams. And so I think there's this desire to unpack where the toxicity is coming from. And for me, sometimes it's saying, well, I love the language of Mary Rowe's research about scaffolding of discrimination, right? This like scaffolding concept. So then how do we unpack that? How do we deconstruct that? And for me, deconstruction is saying, wow, when you're bringing me into an organization, I got asked to speak to a global team who were doing emerging markets. And I was told, listen, before you go in, you need to know they're going to attack you. They don't like outsiders. You need to have a deck in your research in your back pocket. And if you're scared of very aggressive men, you probably shouldn't come here. That was their call, saying they wanted me to speak to them. No, so I just have to give you a little bit of the irony in this. Emerging markets. Okay, just that alone, huge company, right? So anyway, I ended up not doing it. And the company that hired me out was livid. Livid that I said I didn't want to do it. Livid because it's a huge name global company, really would look good for them, everything else. And I said, okay. And I said, just those little examples, literally 2 meetings I had with them, made me know that I would not be successful there. I would be a nervous wreck. I wouldn't be Tanya, and I would be experienced. They already told me, you're going to be attacked. Right? You're going to be this. And then you're telling me you have problems with emerging markets. No shoot, Charlotte. Right? I mean, that was what I wanted to say, but couldn't, because then I would have gotten in even more trouble. But it's sort of, think about the irony in that. Seriously. And so you all can say, wow, but if you knew the name of the company, you would be like, I'm shocked at that, I don't believe it, et cetera. And it's not relevant, but just think about, we do this all the time. So I think for me, it's the two things. It's acknowledging it, but it's pointing it out. And it's knowing how pervasive it can be without being paranoid. I believe in that. I think that's a really healthy dose of sort of balance. I also think it helps to say to people, guess what? It's there. And how can we look at this back in our organizations? I would love to know if emails changed because of the training, right? I would love to know if the way meetings were handled. I would love to know some of those specific behaviors that were done to change some of the ways that might be operating on a team. So that would be what comes to mind.
Do you guys have any examples of things that happen in your organization where you've actually been the one to sort of bring it to someone's attention to try to change behaviors or just raise awareness?
I actually have a question back on the example that you offered on the lab situation where the person was feeling like experienced literally that no one talked to her. The question of ascribing intent, I mean, there could be a whole lot of things going on. There could be a highly competitive setup where like all the scientists were like pitted against each other, so none of them talked to each other, and that this person who happened to be a woman and a person of color felt like it was because of certain characteristics when it could be just the environment. So, you know what I mean? Like, so how, and I often feel like I'm interacting in places where certain things happen to me and like that I ascribe intent to, like, oh, that person cut me off and they did it on purpose or whatever. And I have to work through, like mentally, like, oh, that person was just not paying attention. You know what I mean? Like,
yes.
It's one of the things that I'm personally working on, not ascribing intent. So yes. I wonder, like, how that fits into all these situations.
To give you a little bit more background on the example, and I'm glad that you're bringing that up, because that's a very good way of illustrating what could happen to most of us in different situations. So in the case of this woman in particular, she was the administrative support for that team. So there was a need for the scientists to interact with her. So what was happening is that they would wait until she would leave her office to leave stuff there. So you see, there's more to this story. So I just kind of made it short. And these are circumstances that are still often in many places in corporate America when people feel uncomfortable about a team member. Okay, the most popular are race, gender, sexual orientation. Those are the ones. But I think somebody also brought up class is huge, and it's more more subtle, but it's there. So there were indications throughout, and it was consistent. That's the whole issue about these micros, that they're cumulative. It's not one, like just somebody telling you something or ignoring you, cutting you off just one time. It's a constant, consistent, different ways. And not only one person, which is sometimes the case. There's one person that is just the one that is not, it's not a good team member. But no, this is the culture. And MIT, I'm very familiar with their work and efforts about diversity, and they are trying very hard because they're in an environment where it's pretty sexist. That's their issue. Maybe not race, maybe not class. For them, it's sexism, and particularly in science. So this has been going on for decades. And so just that, but you're right. It's just, what else is going on? This is just one time? No, it's on the course of 3 months just to, and it was ongoing. And what happens generally is people leave. People get reassigned, and the centers, because they have tenure, they have a position of power, and in your world, be a, big donor, they don't get ruffled, right? So, and that is reality of this issue.
That was one of the questions, though. Maybe you want to start to address the question about the pendulum swinging, right? That was sort of connected.
Right. So how do we keep ourselves from letting the pendulum swing so far in the other direction that we all of a sudden become very paranoid and we're afraid to even say anything or make a, you know, I tend to handle things in my own life with a sense of humor. I like to make people laugh, and if somebody does something to sort of offend me, I will make a joke about it. That will be my initial, you know, I like everybody to feel comfortable kind of thing. Or conversely, I might joke with my friends about something, but I think we're becoming, as a society, like, oh my gosh, you know, I said something offensive and I didn't mean to. I'm really a little bit nervous about that we're going to just as a society go so far over here that we're no longer talking to each other.
I would say, you know, and I've been meditating lately, so I'm going to use a little bit of that mindfulness, you know, talk, but just taking one moment at a time and knowing that you can be both. You actually can be you can play three roles, the sender, receiver, and there is also the witness, the person that actually is watching something unfold that is not happening to you. You're just witnessing it. So just to give you a little bit more on the upcoming presentation I'll give you. But from those three perspectives, I would say just be aware of the roles you will be playing and take it one day at a time. I know it sounds cliche, but that's the only way that I have found personally and that I have found people who are trying to make this work, again, building that muscle is not, and I think for some of us who do work in training, facilitation, coaching, consulting, sometimes the expectation is, tell us the 5 steps to get this done. Okay? Or do, you know, give me this is going to cure you or something. This is definitely not the case for the microaffirmations or microinequities, microaggressions. It's a process that is very personal, is very contextual, and it will vary depending on what the perception is of the other, the environment, the policies, the programs, the processes in the organization. It is very much a moving target. So the pendulum, the only way to manage it is to go with it. Is what I sometimes call as surfing. You know, you're kind of like trying to figure it out. And for that, you need a good core, a good center of gravity. And how do you get that to that center of gravity is through your own self-reflection to know where you are. Kind of, you are here, that sign. Start with yourself and grow that muscle. And then you can support, you can intervene, you can react, you can influence. That's how I would do it. Yeah. Okay.
I will confess to sharing a lot of paranoia too, but I'm wondering.
Join the club.
I'm wondering if another factor is pride.
Yeah.
I mean, the people who are other, include many of us around the table, have been robbed of our self-confidence and our pride through racism, homophobia, classism, etc. And I reflected back in the 70s. Worked for a foundation, and I had a communications office. I was executive director, and I edited what she wrote. She was African American, and she was offended. You know, she was offended that, you know, I thought she didn't write well enough. That was from the context of me as the boss, and she's the communications person. Since that time, and it was 30 years ago, every work situation I'm in, I always say, editing is a gift we give to each other. So I've tried to extract from it a principle, because just Mike, you rang in on editing. That's a sensitive issue. You write something, you want feedback. But we're in particularly in foundations, writing. Oh God, I don't know about you all, but it's a very serious undertaking that we think of a lot of people looking over our shoulders. So it's a systematic thing. And if we've come out of a position of lack of building up our pride and self-confidence, then something as simple as me just innocently editing something is perceived as a microaggression. So to me, a conversation starter is just setting a broader context. Always, wherever I am in a work situation, I say, editing is a gift. Let me explain. When I edit or anybody edits, it's something we give to each other. So I think a conversation starter is setting in a frame, if you will, to liberate people from some of the situations that they may think elicit paranoia or elicit concern or challenge their sense of self-confidence. Does that make sense?
I agree. And it also is about the language, you know. If that works for you, I'm thinking about it, for example, I would say, you know, how do you feel about editing? Because a lot, you know, I write too, and writers, we're very, very sensitive in our egos, and we said, this is what I meant, and you cannot take that out. So knowing that, I think that being more empathic to the individual, particularly if there is a power relationship. So it's like, Mary Jo, this is part of the deal, pretty much. How do you feel about editing? And of course, if you're the boss, you're not going to offer much, I imagine. But this is part of this is a give and take. And if we're on a deadline, we're going to have to get to the point, And I want to just let you know that this is what is coming. And it gets a little hairy when there is this, there's more of a complexity to the issue because of race, gender, and perhaps affiliations, people who have been recommended by so-and-so, or if they see themselves as, gifted writers, for example. It's like, oh, he's been here, I am the one who's done. So all those complexities make it a little murkier. But I think that you have a good point there. It's just more about the language and getting to know the person. How can you bring the same message in a way that works for that person? And you see, as opposed, editing is a gift, sounds well to me, but it sounds a tiny, if I may, that is how you see the world. How do they see the world about it? What is their perspective about editing? So give them an opportunity to say, how do you feel about editing? And then if you still want to use your language, but at least you gave them the opportunity to voice their perspective. You see? So that will make it more democratic, or at least more inclusive.
I also think that it comes to mind the piece about I also think it goes back to the piece about trust that came up before, right? So I think about that example. I attended a lecture the other day in San Francisco, and there was a woman who wanted a whole section sent free. So we're in this big auditorium. It was a sold-out event. It was Angela Davis, and John Kabat-Zinn, right? So you're talking about two luminaries, and she had a whole section that was sent free. And she had a sign, sent, no sense. She has a very strong allergy. And so people were coming up and wanting to sit there because they were, scent-free section. I'd never seen this either, but we're in S-C-E-N-T. But we're in Oakland, so, it's a different world. Like, I can't imagine that happening in Madison Square Garden. But anyway, so, and I tell this because this was so interesting to me, because it connects to your question about this being an African-American woman. So the woman kept saying to people, you can only sit here if you're scent-free, and people were saying, okay, I'm not, they'd leave. And then some people would say, I am, and she'd say, let me smell your hair. Right? So anyway, this went on. This went on. And then two black women came, and two black women who had locks. And she said, this is the scent-free section. And they said, we're scent-free. We don't wear perfume. We don't do whatever. And she said, let me smell your hair. And literally, like my side right next to the scent-free side, somebody said, please no. It was this dynamic in the room. And we talked about it. I was with my family yesterday, and I was telling them the story. And the language I would also give to you from the diversity world is language from Mark Williams about legacies. And like, if you know the legacy of some of those things, I love your language of pride, it's also legacy, right? If this legacy of, the LGBT microaggression example that I gave from one of the I2 examples, are you a man or a woman, right? There's a legacy. It's that cumulative impact of constantly being asked that question, right? Of African Americans having a history and a stereotype of like, and by the way, she asked so many other people before these two women. But when she asked them, their faces were like, are you kidding? I mean, it was like, I was like, okay, let's just sit. Like, I was, it's just, before it starts. But the legacy, and so my thought would be, are we open? So the question about pendulum, I have two reactions as someone who just looks at systems. Are we open to changing systems, which means our rules have changed of engagement? So the way that I do things, and the way that I would do things with people who are like me, biracial women from Queens, New York, my driver just said, you seem really happy, the cab driver. He's like, you seem really happy. You weren't born in America, were you? I said, yes. He's like, you don't seem like a New Yorker because you're smiling. And I'm like, well, it's a day. I don't know what to say about that. But the thing is, the thing is, for me, it's like there's a legacy that we bring, and Mark Williams talks about the fact that there's a legacy that all of us have around this table, no matter what group we're from. We're legacy if we're Irish, we're legacy if we're LGBT, we're legacy if we're African American, Latino, Asian. We're legacy in terms of foundation world, what that's meant and what that looked like. So I think being aware of what the legacies are is really helpful. And to Anna's point, which I hope we don't miss, that trust piece, how do we remember that? Because if I trust you and you said something to me, I'm going to be much more likely to say to you and just have to say, Susan, I'm not sure that you realize this, but this is how it felt, versus if you say something to me, there's no relationship, I don't even address it with you, and then what happens? It builds up, it potentially builds up, or for me, worse, I just check you off as clueless. Like seriously, in my head, check. We do that, right? Check, clueless, check, does it get, but if at least we're engaging, and I do feel like, and I don't know a nicer way to say this, we just have to realize, I hear the pendulum discussion a lot around diversity, and I wonder if we can just say, how are we reacting to a changing world? The pendulum is swinging. Maybe we don't want to say it swung too much, but like, let's acknowledge that the workplace is different. There are people who are different. I did a session for 60% of the people were visually impaired. This never happened to me before. And they slammed me, fair enough. They were annoyed. But anyway, no one told me it was 60% and I had PowerPoint slides. Oh boy. And I got there and the organizer said, no, everybody uses PowerPoint. Just do it and talk about what's on each slide. But if you had told me before who my audience really was, and when I told them about unconscious bias and the 3 triggers being race, age, and gender, they said, you don't have disability there. And I said, you're absolutely right. It is disability. I would agree with you 100%. And I'm like, I'm just giving you this sort of tad bit of research. And they were like, well, bunk the research. And it's a legacy. It's a legacy of being invisible. It's a legacy of not being included. God bless you. So you see it where sometimes that wasn't my intention, right? Back to the whole piece of intention. So I think understanding legacies is really, really important. And I don't think we always know legacies. I don't think I knew, again, back to Selma, because I've seen it twice, but I don't think I knew some of the issues about voting rights before hearing some of the things needed in Selma. There was one scene where Dr. King was deciding what he was going to say to LBJ about what to fight for, and his team is going down the list of one of the things he should fight for. Should it be this about voting rights? Should it be? And I'm sitting there going, I didn't know we needed that. That's a legacy. Right? That's a legacy that I don't have necessarily, but that other people have. So that would be something I would think about.
A lot of thoughts in there. I was taking notes because I want to come back to some of those. But I think I'm going to turn it over to Anna at this point. And will you talk to us a little bit about microaffirmations?
Sure.
Thank you.
Take a sip. So microaffirmations. So, it's so fitting that we're here right after Dr. King's holiday. I really love his quotes, and one of which talks about, the darkness doesn't bring darkness, and light brings dark, does away with the darkness. So, to me, that's what microaffirmations are. It's not the remedy, it's not the formula. It doesn't cure. It doesn't cure it. It offers hope. And I think that this discussion is, in addition to trust, is also about hope. And because if you think about, thinking back in what I was talking about, talking about illnesses, talking about how bad things are, I get the point of being, to starting the conversation there, but I often see the need to show that light at the end of the tunnel, And to me, that's what this work is about. And I think Tanya offers some formal definitions for microaffirmations, but in general, microaffirmations are events, acts. Oops, did I turn it off? Okay, let me go. That the intent is to value, acknowledge, and actually you'll have these slides sent to you later, so in case you want to focus on the content, and just, ask questions along the way. So endorse, and they make people feel included, validated, appreciated. To the example about the woman who felt invisible. See? So the people, the audience that Tanya just referred to that were visually impaired, they didn't feel like they were included. So microaffirmations are the complete opposite of aggressions and inequities for 3 reasons. And this is part of Dr. Rowe's work. She says that affirmations, if you are given an affirmation, you are not given an aggression. Okay, so an affirmation replaces an aggression. Okay, so if you are including someone, by definition, you are not excluding them. That's how that works. And microaffirmations, as the same way that in aggressions, they have a cumulative effect. So it's a snowball effect. You start one, you can build on another, you can build on another, and that experience will build and will grow. Okay? Now, there is research that shows that for every negative experience or aggression that you've experienced as a receiver, you need between 3 to 7 positive to counteract it. Now, don't go nuts trying to keep track. Okay? I often question that. Should I share that with people? But, and it will depend on I would say, the quality and the depth and the impact of the aggression or inequity, So, and how it sits with you. But it's 3 to 7, depending, and there are debates about it. Now, the other reason why affirmations are powerful are because they serve as role models. So if you see somebody doing them, it's like, oh, it's kind of like that paid forward approach. You see somebody doing it. There are commercials that people open doors, they have an umbrella, or they smile, they acknowledge people. Oh, there's a surge of energy, of positivity. So, it's like, Tanya smiling in New York as a New Yorker. So that kind of is infectious in a way. So those are the 3 that are the reasons why affirmations are an answer to aggressions. Now, I'm going to do a little bit. We've talked about Dr. Su and his work, and a lot of the research that is out there about aggressions is based on psychology. Okay, social psychology, clinical psychology, because aggressions actually are creating a lot of anxiety and a lot of issues, psychological issues for folks. So let's dissect for a minute how we process microaffirmations and actually aggressions. First, there is something that happens. There is the look. If you don't mind me using your example, is that okay? Or, okay, there's something that happened. So you saw that. So that information entered your mind as, okay, look. That's the cognitive side. There was an emotional component. It was, whoa, what's going on? We felt frustrated, weird, taken aback, doubtful. There was something, and then there was perhaps or not a behavior. But that's the cycle. We just don't notice it. It happens instantaneously. It happens in seconds. And it's for positive and negative, for aggressions, inequities, and affirmations. There's a nod. Oh, she acknowledged me. I feel happy. And then I do something else. You see, it's a cycle. And we generally, for any type of training, personal, professional development, any new information that we acquire, we generally live in the cognitive world. What we're learning, knowledge. We love that. I mean, talk about research. I love research, so I can totally understand that. What I'm asking you to focus on for the purposes of this discussion is that there is an emotional piece that we all bring to this, whether you know it or not, whether you try to put it aside and repress it or not, or you try to show it as anger or frustration or just denial, there is an emotional component. And there will be a behavior. And as somebody already mentioned, inaction could also be a behavior in a way. So just, anything you want to take away from today, just include emotion and behavior in the way you process, in how you interact with others is crucial for you to learn more and to actually become more aware about this topic. Now, how do we start? How do we start to become more a group of microaffirmers? Start with yourself. You already heard. I kind of blew my own, we've been talking about in the Q&A what to do. And part of it is start with yourself. and check your biases at the door. This is one quick example. I just listed some ways in how we perceive others. Colleagues, donors, people that we're partnering with, people that we see on the street. So see if any of them resonate with you, or maybe not. But find the ones, 2 or 3, that might be more top of mind for you. Where do you see them? Do you see them, for example, to me, and the word unintentional is very much part of the conversation, because we are not mean people by nature. Okay, I forget who is the one who said people are not, they are taught to hate. We're not born hating. We're taught to hate. We're taught to exclude. We're taught to develop that behavior. It's a behavioral thing that we learn by seeing other people, see their role model, and by repeating the same behavior. So they become unconsciously built in our system. As a matter of fact, another piece of research I'll share with you is not to scare you. Talk about paranoia. I'm kind of shooting my own foot here, but 90 to 95% of all the processes that our brains do on a daily basis are unconscious. 90 to 95. Okay? Flipping the page, walking, you're not even thinking about it. Only 5% of your brain is conscious. So all the preconceived notions you have about people, all the nonverbal gestures you make, everything is coming from your built-in unconscious. And that's why the topic of unconscious bias that Tanya mentioned is the foundation to become microaffirmers and to be more aware of microaggressions. Now, I would encourage you, and I don't know how many of you have already done this, but this is a free test. I would invite you to actually take the test and see how biased you really are. Wow. I'm just going to say it out there. Okay, and the good thing is not only one test, and it's not only to Tanya's earlier point about race, gender, sexual orientation or disability, which are generally the topics, and maybe class, socioeconomic status. There's about any given topic by industry, by you name it. Dr. Banerjee, whose book I'm also going to recommend, is eye-opening. And if you want to invest $20, those are the best 20, maybe 30, I don't know. Well, that's a book I would recommend to get you started in your self-discovery, and along with the test. Now, I'll tell you, I took the test, I do this for a living. I'm just as biased as the next person. And it's funny, you would think that you are not biased in certain things, but you are. For example, in my case, I am biased against women who stay at home. And I'm saying this in live stream. And that's okay. Part of the conversation has to include your personal stories and how you are part of this evolution in a way. So, because I've always worked, I've worked since I was 18, I've been to school, graduate degrees, super achiever, etc. And then I had to stay at home for a while to raise my family. And who knew I had an issue with that? And it came out clear. Actually, the book gives you some, you can do, if you have a pencil, there are tests in the book to do, and I was shocked because my grandma was a homemaker. My mom was a working, professional. So to me, it was, so I could not believe it. But it was eye-opening, and it was very sobering to find out that just anybody could be biased. Now, the other thing, aside, and this is almost like a physical, okay? That's how I see it. A physical. A lot of us do not like to have physicals, I know. But if you're really serious about learning about this and growing and just taking this beyond today, as key point here, how important is this for your professional life, for your personal life? So, hit and run training workshops are fabulous for facilitators, but how about you? Okay, if you want to really go beyond this, do this. This is on your own. And then the other thing I will invite you to do is to do an audit. You're doing an audit of yourself on the left. On the right, do an audit of where you live, so to speak. We've already talked about the 3 roles: sender, receiver, and witnesses. Or in the lingo, the research lingo is called bystander. Okay? So where do you normally generally live within the context of microaggressions, microaffirmations? Are you really in a toxic environment where you are like everybody is like, oh my God? Or is everybody paranoid and not saying anything because they're afraid they're going to say something bad? You need to do an audit of the context where you are living, spending most of your time, and what role is your primary role. Are you a bystander that is just like, you know what, that's their issue, it's not mine? That's fine. And if that's what you take away from this, that's you. So those 2 are just the 2 action points I would encourage you and invite you to look into and consider it. At least if you don't want to go into the audit because it's too complicated, there's politics, you know, it's too emotional for some of us, at least go for a physical. And buy the book. If you don't want to go online, buy the book and start with the book and then go online. Now, I want to give you specific examples of how microaffirmations happen. And again, this is a very dear topic and issue for me because, again, there is this microaggressions website, and I was telling Mary Rose, like, we have to start a microaffirmations website. What is this? This is crazy. And she's like, yeah, let's do that. So we have been collecting some examples on how people affirm each other. Okay, and I think you have it in the bio. There is a website there. You can go there and see examples. We also have examples of bystanders that have spoken up. So, and if not, I'll put them on the list of resources, so you'll get to those. And you're also welcome to add your own stories. We're collecting stories. The interesting thing is that people are more prone and willing to share the aggressions and inequities. Yeah, this happened to me, or this I did, or that, oh, I don't know when I was last validated, included, felt, you know, part of the team, or was, I don't, that is, so there is something, and that's why to me, okay, yes, there is a huge issue here in aggressions, I get it, but if we live there, do we all stay in a toxic, if there's some, you know, smoky air coming, do you stay there? Do you want to live there? Good luck. I want to live in a fresh air environment. You know, I want to produce some fresh air. So to me, the affirmations, trying to start thinking from the affirmation standpoint is the first step to combat, in a way, if you want to use the word fight or minimize or manage the aggressions. So affiliation is one of the ways. And affiliation speaks particularly about the feeling of belonging. You know, not being invisible and being visible, being part of the team. So one informal way in the workplace could be just to invite people over, try to reach out to people that you don't know. It is so typical for us to just hang out with our own department, with our own, the folks that were hired at the same time, the people that have similar interests. We all do that. You know, even people, I don't know about you, Tanya, but sometimes it's like, oh, now that I know her, if I go to a conference, I may just go and talk to the people I know. It's like, wait a minute, what, you know, reality check here. Let's try, and trying to find ways to open up ourselves and bring people. And if you are a person of influence in a certain context, bring others to that group. Another way, a more formal way to build affiliation and use that as a microaffirmation is to question and maybe audit your policies, programs, and processes at work. How are they creating a feeling of affiliation? How are they being inclusive? And by inclusive, I don't mean, and please correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not the expert, the I expert here, is not necessarily, oh, we're just going to we're doing a potluck, or we're going to the bar after work to all hang out. And some people may not drink. Some people may have family responsibilities. You see? So let's not blanket that affiliation effort by just, oh, let's just do something so everybody shows up. does not help. That actually excludes. Well, they know I have a kid. They know I have to. You see, so let's be careful. And again, be aware of who are we including and how are we including. Now, the other way that I would say I would recommend to consider, for you to consider examples of microaffirmations is the whole thing about autonomy. How do we create situations where we make people feel that we trust them, that they have the freedom to do their work, and this speaks particularly to the issue of competence. This is a sore point with women and minorities because of the perception that they are less, they don't know enough, and so forth. So, one example to foster autonomy is delegation, and not delegation of menial tasks. I'm talking about delegation of something that is important, something that is going to produce visibility, that is going to produce some key piece of a project. Perhaps mentoring is in place, needs to be part of the process. You're not going to just drop something on somebody's lap and they don't know what to do. Of course not. But to show that, hey, maybe this is a good time for you to step up. If you want, I'll help you along. You know? And that may start the way to build that trust that we were referring to earlier. Now, and again, this could be also formalized in processes that go throughout the organization. So, any questions at this point? Yes.
Hi, I'm Aaron Jacobs from the Edna McConnell Clark Foundation. And I just have an observation, and I love that you put these up here, because when we started talking about affirmations, I instantly went to affirmations can very quickly become aggressions.
Yes.
If you don't pay attention to sort of the legacies and the history of who you're talking to,
yes,
you know, doing something that you might think is an affirmation might actually, on the lesser end, be annoying. on the other side, you know, be an aggression. And if you don't have that trust built up yet, as well. And for me, it comes like, and I like this because these are actions as well, as opposed to just words.
Yeah.
Something that I think about a lot is gratitude. And it's such a buzzword right now. And we're all grateful and gratitude. But you telling me that you're so grateful is not the same as you showing me. So I just wanted to say that I appreciate that these are actions, and reinforcing that affirmations are not just words.
No, and actually, thanks for, it's a great segue to the next thing I had to share with you as I wrap up. That, and I think Tanya alluded to this earlier. There, you know, if you were to sort out the micros, aggressions and affirmations, there's a verbal, nonverbal, and environmental. See, so that speaks to that. So actions are only part of the equation. Environmental are, you know, if you go to an organization and you see yourself on the wall of CEOs or executives or board members. See, do you see the typical, you know, locker room pictures or whatever, you know, take a pick. So there are different types of affirmations and aggressions. It's not only about action, it's about also what we don't say. So that's one point. The other thing is that there are two, your point about affirmations becoming aggressions. There's definitely that is a really tricky way of putting yourself out there. Okay, I'm going to try to be more affirming. I don't know if I'm going to do it. Maybe I'm not. And there are two types of situations. One is the backhanded compliment. So one example is, you know, the typical example comes up, and it's actually in this book, is that when Joe Biden told Obama, you know, he's very articulate for a young man, or I forget what exactly. So he was trying to say, hey, he's a good, you know, I think he's great. But what was he really seeing? He's very articulate for a black man, right? And then that was not, so the compliment became an aggression. Obama said, I don't care, I'm going to be president anyway. And what did he do? He picked Biden as his VP. You see, that's a different workshop. I won't be able to explain that one. I actually wrote a paper on that. But anyway, so the backhanded compliment is really tricky. You know, I have a client who said she's Latina engineer, graduated with a PhD from MIT, and she was looking for career opportunities, and the HR person said, you know, for a Latina, you've accomplished a lot, with those words. And she was trying to be, hey, you've made it. What else do you want to do? And you already, you know. So backhanded compliments are tricky, and we give them with the best of intentions. So that's one. The other one is the one-upping. So somebody comes to you, it's like, oh, yeah, actually it's another person, real life examples, I love them, came and said to her colleague, he's like, I can't believe that this happened to me. You know, let's say he crossed out all the stuff, 5 paragraphs, and then the colleague says, oh, that's nothing. Oh, the other time he tore this up. So right there, you're invalidating the experience. The person is telling you to share, so oh, I'm sorry, I'm sorry you feel that way. But no, so I don't care about what happened. Listen to what happened to me is more important. And we do it in conversation every day. And for senders, maybe it's not as relevant, but for receivers within this context, oh, can you believe they said, oh, that's nothing. They said these words. So they were starting to a competition of who was more microaggressed. And that's why, to me, it's like, do you really want to talk about that all day? And some people need to go through that journey until they're ready to turn the corner.
You know, the other thing that comes to mind in what you're saying, is that in some ways, I think it's also about communication, right? And what we've lost in communication. Good communication with my teammates would mean that there's some level of trust. Doesn't mean I necessarily love you, et cetera, but I would have that trust. And I think about the example in the auditorium in San Francisco, and again, as an asthmatic, I get it. Breathing, allergies, it's key. I'm not making light of it. I just saw this like unbelievable firecracker of a moment where there was so much built up in there, and I don't think anybody had any idea what was there. And I just wonder I often wonder, actually, even around diversity, and I've been doing diversity work for over 25 years, that some of this could be really solved with basic communication and dialogue more than communication. So it's this interesting language. I'm not simplifying any of this, but my goal in diversity work and in work that includes this would be these topics would be in a regular leadership program.
Yes.
Because it's leadership, right? I mean, it's good leadership. So yet, in essence, we're sort of segmenting a lot of these things. But I have to tell you, some days I go home and I'm like, I'm being paid to tell people to play nice together. No, seriously, I'm in organizations that are not working or teams that are not working often because of diversity. I mean, there's something missing there for me, and I appreciate your. To me, the analogy of gratitude is there too, right? Show me. So leadership is showing me. Being on a team and being a valued member, showing me. I have to just say this, and again, this is a live stream, and I know we're cutting that off soon, so maybe I should have said this after the live stream. But there's an interesting thing to me when we have Silicon Valley that's so not diverse. And you know what comes to my mind? Did no one notice this before? Right? Did we not? That's the question for me as a diversity practitioner, and that's not about my analysis skills, that's not about my research, that's just a question as a human being who would be sitting down in a team meeting or walking around offices in these companies. Did no one notice this before? And therefore then we need to go back to what we're missing and what we're observing on a basic fundamental level. And that would be, I love this sort of emotion and the reaction, that would be that she might have seen the reaction when you made that comment about the pants, when she made the comment about the pants. That would be that we'd be able to note the verbals or the nonverbals of someone. I feel like something's lost a little bit, right?
Doesn't that sort of beg the question a little bit, though, that there is a responsibility on the receiver's end to not play the victim? And maybe I'll be a little bit devil's advocate here, but you can't always play the victim. At some point, you need to raise your hand and say, what you said bothered me, or you should,
Yes and no, because not every person is going to react different the same. And also, if you're talking about introverts, I work with a lot of scientists and engineers, and they need to think about what just happened, and go back and analyze it. And so it's not reacting to, and again, that's a bystander training. It's a different workshop. It's a whole reacting to addressing a microaggression in the spot does not need to happen in the moment, and it depends on the circumstance and the context. If it's the same first time, if it's the same person, is it the same microaggression? And the whole point about the victim conversation, it is really difficult because, are we running out of time? Okay. But I want to make a quick point here, and we can always talk offline later. It is a difficult conversation, and for some folks, that will be what they would say. It's like, when are you going to stop complaining that this happens to you all the time? It is difficult. It's very hard. It's very easy to judge and make assumptions, but each person is going to stay in or be able to move beyond that on their own terms. I can just say, hey, you keep saying that, just do something about it. It's easy for me to say because I'm already there. She's not there. Right. Hope you don't mind. And we don't know how they are interpreting a microaggression that the two of us will experience. The same microaggression, we might internalize them differently. Right. And if they are cumulative, and if the person's identity is threatened because of all these issues, and if there's physiological effects to microaggressions. People who, if you've ever stubbed your toe, the brain releases certain chemicals. When you're socially rejected, you feel socially rejected or criticized, the same chemicals that when you stub your toes. So for anybody that thinks that, oh, this is just get over it, stub your toe. and then get over it. So it's very personal. And the good news is that there is help, there is support. People before this was this was kind of like a secret. A lot of folks were working behind the scenes, but now it's out in the open. So for those folks who are feeling frustrated and angry, and perhaps they feel like they're victims, I would encourage them to find somebody who is not, who they trust, to start to open up and start trusting. That's what I would say.
Well, Anna was speaking about microaffirmations. 2 quotes came to mind. I think it was Maya Angelou, but I don't really remember. You might not remember what someone said to you, but you will always remember how they made you feel.
Yes.
Right? Really important quote. And the other one of my very favorite quotes by Abraham Lincoln was, "I don't like that person. I must get to know him better." I love that quote, right?
Yes, that's a great.
Some common sense around this too. We are going to move to the portion now where we are going to say goodbye to our live streaming friends. Thank you for joining us. And we are going to break up in small groups. Tanya and Anna have a couple of questions they'd like you to discuss. I think what maybe we'll do is make that 10 minutes and then put the longer piece of time back to sort of share that. Is that okay?
That sounds great. And to remind folks, this goes to 11:15.
And the clock's 5 minutes.
And the clock
down.
Thank you for all those questions.
Yes.
So bye, live stream people. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us.
So maybe like groups of just 4.
Yeah.
Does that work for